Ontario Place, that once iconic park on prime Toronto waterfront, turns 50 this year. And while many people have very fond memories of the place, its future is up in the air. This summer, word is expected on how the province plans to redevelop it. With us on that, we're joined in Fez, Morocco by Aziza Shaouni, co-lead for the Future of Ontario Place project. She's an associate professor at the University of Toronto's John H. Daniels Faculty of Architecture. And in the Riverside neighbourhood of the provincial capital, David Ryder, City Hall Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. And we're delighted to welcome both of you from very near and very far away to our program this evening.
Thank you so much.
Great to have you.
Thank you.
Let's just start by reading this from the Toronto Star's editorial board. David, I suspect you might have had a hand in the writing of this, but this goes back to last month. And Sheldon, if you would, here we go. When the Ford government decided to embark on a much-needed redevelopment of Ontario Place, it asked international developers to submit their ideas for the 155 acres of prime real estate on Toronto's waterfront. It did not ask the people who live here what they want done with this publicly owned land. It did not reach out to the city, which has a significant interest in Ontario Place and owns neighbouring Exhibition Place, another 192 acres that are also in need of revitalization. In fact, the government didn't even offer up a vision of its own, beyond the vague desire for, quote, a world-class year-round destination. Okay, David, let's just go back to a bit of the beginning of this. Why is the provincial government determined in the first place to redevelop Ontario Place?
Well, there's a bit of a mystery as to why all of a sudden Doug Ford had a real desire to redo it, although the park was essentially fallow and unused, so it makes sense they would at some point. But it was at the opening of the X a few years ago that a TV cameraman just sort of said to him, like, are you going to redevelop Ontario Place? And he said, yeah. And then at the announcement, all of a sudden he said, and we're going to redo Ontario Place. And then since then, there's been a big push with, as you mentioned, proposals coming from all over the world on how to redo it. I mean, we know that Doug Ford has an interest in the waterfront. When he was at the City of Toronto as a city councillor and right-hand man to his brother Rob, who was mayor, people will recall that he essentially tried to engineer a takeover of the city's waterfront plans and seize it from Waterfront Toronto, which is an agency that has city, provincial, and federal. That didn't fly. So I think we all expected at some point he would, want to put his stamp on Ontario Place, which is provincially owned property. But how he went about it, I think, was different than a lot of the people at the city expected.
Well, let's just remind everybody how we got here. We've got a half century of history to look back at. And let me just take a moment here to go through it, because it was, in fact, back on May 22nd, 1971, that Ontario Place opened to the public, followed by, you may remember this, the Children's Village the next year. John Robarts was the premier who wanted kids in Toronto to have a place to play in the summer, so he got Ontario Place started. Bill Davis was the premier who cut the ribbon on the place 50 years ago. In 1992, let's fast forward, it was redefined as a water amusement park. In 1994, its open-air theatre, The Forum, boy, that place was great, but it was replaced by the Molson Amphitheatre. In 2002, the Children's Village was demolished. In 2012, Ontario Place was shuttered by the then government of Premier Dalton McGuinty. In 2014, the province recognized Ontario Place as a heritage place. In 2019, the province abandoned its potential plan to put a casino on the grounds of Ontario Place. And last year, Ontario Place was added to the World Monuments Watch List. Okay, let's pick up the story there. Aziza, the World Monuments Watch List, what is that?
Well, it is, kind of a list that's been put together by an NGO based in New York and having arms of all over the world called the World Monuments Fund, and that decide of every year to name the most important buildings in the world that are at risk, so the heritage buildings. And Ontario Place has been named, in 2020, at the same time as Easter Island, for example, or the Cathedral of Notre Dame. So that speaks a lot of its importance as heritage on the world stage.
In your view, what makes Ontario Place worthy of being on that list?
Well, there are so many things, but one thing for sure, it's its unique combination of landscape, and so it's 3 artificial islands that were built on Lake Ontario that are interconnected by a series of different parks and also different bridges that connect a series of landmark buildings, including the famous Cinesphere that hosted the first IMAX theater in the world, 5 floating pods, the Children's Village, the villages. So it's simply a stunning piece of what we call in the field of architecture, it's a mega structure. So it's a structure that attempts to integrate architecture, landscape, and infrastructure together. And there are very few of them in the world that were built on the water. So if Toronto holds one of these very few modern masterpieces, why would they want to tamper with it?
All right, one more follow-up, Aziza. If it enjoys heritage place protection, is it not safe?
It's not actually protected. It was indeed put on the list of heritage by the province in 2014, but very conveniently, it was removed from that list right before the call for development. Now, if it is on the list of the World Monuments Fund, it has an international recognition, but this recognition, unfortunately, today does not seem to be understood by the province.
All right, let's stay with the province. David, again, help us with some of the background here, because you're quite right. When Doug Ford first became premier and was asked about this, it seemed like all bets were off, right? I mean, a casino was potentially in the mix, ripping down Cinesphere and the pods was part of the mix. That's not part of the plan now. So what happened along the way to get Premier Ford to change his mind about what potentially could happen there?
Yeah, I mean, I have to speculate a little bit, but I think a lot happened, including his government going through a period of real unpopularity for a while and then grappling with the pandemic. Yeah, you're right. Originally, they said no condos and no casino. That was the original ground rules. And then since then, they've said that the Cinesphere and the pods will remain. The originally they were asked, well, what if somebody wanted to tear down the Cinesphere? They said, well, let's not close our minds. What if you wanted to build all along the lake and close off the lake and just have a corporate structure there? And they were like, let's listen to it. But I think part of it is that people might remember that Doug Ford and John Tory are fairly friendly now, but not that long ago, before the pandemic, they were kind of at war because Doug Ford wanted to make deep public health cuts to all the local health units, and Toronto especially. John Tory went door to door with Joe Cressy, who happens to be the councillor. He's the public health chair. He happens to be the councillor for Ontario Place, arguing against those cuts in the wards of Doug Ford's Conservative members. And Toronto won that war. I think Doug Ford now is saying he won't do anything without John Tory's say-so. Since that editorial was written in the Star, groups of civil servants from the city are meeting with groups of civil servants from the province. I think the fact is that Doug Ford is a year away from an election, and he wants to keep all the Toronto members he can. And his government, is popular in parts of the province, a lot less popular in the city of Toronto.
But technically speaking, Doug Ford is the decider here, right? The city doesn't own the land. It's the province's responsibility. Have I got that right?
That is completely right. The deputy city manager who's leading the Toronto side of the talks, and it's interesting, she's a former longtime Toronto police officer, and the province has made Mark Saunders, the former Toronto police chief, their point guy on this. So that's an interesting dynamic. She reported back to council and said, yeah, the talks are going really well. The province seems really committed to public consultation. They get that Toronto needs to be on board. But then some of the questions to her was, okay, but what are they going to pick for the redevelopment partner? What's actually going to be there? And she said, well, we don't know. They can't tell us. It's a closed kind of bid system. So then the kind of remark was, Toronto's sort of riding shotgun. We're on a trip. We're being asked to plan the trip, but they won't tell us the destination. And I think we're still in that situation. Even the protection of the Cinesphere and the pods, as far as I know, is completely verbal. It's not the original request for expression or interest that the province issued doesn't guarantee that. So right now we're all kind of on whatever. Really, at the end of the day, cabinet has complete control, except for the fact that the city controls sort of the entry points and a little bit of the land. And also, I think there is a big acknowledgement that Ontario Place and Exhibition Place, the city-owned side of that downtown sort of quadrant, should be looked at as a whole. And that was why Toronto was saying, let's sit down and talk about it. Doug Ford now seems to be acknowledging that, but before it was just like, we're going to make it a world-class attraction and there's going to be entertainment and it's going to be great.
Okay, we're going to come back to the bids later, but Aziza, I want to say something here, very provocative, just to get you going, and
Sure.
I'll play devil's advocate, and that is this. If Ontario Place were so fabulous, it wouldn't have been closed for the last decade. Discuss.
Sure, it's a very good point. Well, if it was so fabulous, I mean, let's say that Ontario Place is like a body, right? I mean, if you start to cut pieces of that body, its arms, like the forum, to take out its blood, which was its main program. So you had restaurant, you had stores, you had the very famous children's village that was designed by Macmillan, who he was the father of soft play. So if you truncate key pieces of organism, how can you expect it to survive? So you obviously bled him to death, and you expect him to still function. I mean, my response to you would be that Ontario Place was violated on many accounts by the removal of many programs and several of its key structures. That's the reason why it was not functioning. The reason was also that there was no money that was put in it for its maintenance, and its core value, which was to offer a democratic space for all of Torontonians, especially the ones that don't have access to cottages or to lakes, was completely taken away, because Ontario Place, starting from 1984, there were efforts to monetize it, so to turn it into a theme park, which was not at the core of its principles. So in a sense, why was Ontario Place closed down, not functioning? It was because its core ideas were removed and its core programs as well.
I'm not going to operate under the assumption that everybody who's watching this right now has ever been there. I mean, lots of people have, but lots of people haven't. So, Sheldon, would you mind? I'm at question 5 right now. Can we just start to cycle through some of the pictures? And Aziza, maybe you could take us through this. Just describe, essentially, all of these different features and amenities in Ontario Place.
Sure. So what you can see here is, kind of a little canal, which so you have several of these that are intermingled with the 3 artificial islands of Ontario Place. And you can see people canoeing, and there are a lot of water-related activities. As a matter of fact, Ontario Place has the cleanest water of all of the Toronto waterfront. It was actually designed to be able to minimize pollution by the landscape designer Marco Huff. Here you can see the very famous forum that had an amazing central stage. There are very epic concerts that happen here. I think even when the Queen of England came to visit, she actually visited Ontario Place and the forum here. Next, and you can see here the villages, which are a set of different modular structures that hosted stores and also different type of amenities. Next, please. Here, just kind of a walkway between the landscape designed by Marco Huff that was composed of native species from Ontario, the skating rink, and here it's the summer, so it's the rollerblader rink that happened in the middle of the villages.
And that's it. That's our last picture. So thank you for taking us through all that. I should also say that Ontario Place Forum, I think people loved it so much because the stage, of course, rotated. So it didn't matter where you were sitting. You would always get a great view at some point during the course of it. But of course, they decided to take it down. Okay, David, my turn now to say something to you that you're going to find very provocative and unappealing. But, that's what I do for a living. Eventually, Ontario Place is going to be connected to the subway line. At least that's the plan right now. It's part of Doug Ford's Ontario line. It's the ultimate destination for Ontario line. What would be so bad if we were to put up condos there and have people live there all year round?
Well, I'll preface it by saying I'm a reporter, not a columnist, so I'm a little shy about offering opinion. I would say that one point is I'll make one clarification, which they're all calling it the Ontario line, and they're saying it terminates at Ontario Place, but the station would actually be at Exhibition Place. You'd still have to walk across. So it's not like people would be taking a condo to their doorstep. They would have a kilometer or so to hoof it, and then you'd have to figure out how to get them across. There's been talk about housing and how housing could help pay for whatever else you do there. What I would just say is that so much of Toronto's waterfront is already condos. I mean, I grew up in Etobicoke, and we drive downtown, and my dad worked along the lakeshore. And just, I went from seeing it being sort of somewhat industrial, but you could see the lake, to this thick curtain of condos. Like, it was almost all sold. So I think the feeling of Ontario Place for All and some of the other advocacy groups and Joe Cressy, local councillor, is, condos pay for a lot in the city, and they bring, no doubt, people love seeing the towers in the sky and construction jobs. But this one site is this huge, relatively undeveloped gem. So let's keep it as much as we can where everybody can go everywhere. Because as soon as you put up a condo, then there's a sign that says no going on here. And I know from, the ones farther down the lake, I remember there were times where if you wanted to go and look at your own lake, a security officer with a dog would come and chase you away. So do you want that on this one last gem? The other thing I would say is the way it is right now, actually it gets more visitors, about the same number of visitors as the CN Tower, when there's not much operating there. That tells you the value of the site and what happens to the value of that site when you put up a condo tower.
Aziza, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, sure. I just want to mention that the one of the claim that you mentioned, that nothing is happening in Ontario Place, or what Doug Ford has mentioned is that it's completely run down, goes completely against the result of the research that we led with the World Monument Fund and ACO, that made us realize that there are many, many groups, going from people doing yoga to grannies gathering there, to skateboarders, to people doing canoeing, swimming, bird watchers. There are so many community groups that use the site. So the site, even with no activities, is so active. And during COVID, it has proven to be so important to mental health. So, speaking about putting condos and marinas for kind of expensive boats, etc. For me, it seems pretty shocking in a democracy. It's like, handing High Park to developers to make it more profitable and to add condos onto it. I'm surprised that not more Torontonians are appalled by this idea.
Well, let me follow up with you on that, Aziza. At some point, the province is going to pick a plan and it will unveil it for the public, presumably to have its say. How confident are you that there will be a proper public consultation process so people can have at it?
I'm completely not confident, because it started completely on the wrong foot. Simply, one needs to start with a consultation, first, before developing a project. If you propose a project already set up and wrapped up, the public would have very little say or leeway. I think it's just going to be, superficial. But most importantly, there is something that the provincial government did not do based on international standards. It's a proper conservation management plan. So it's not that changes cannot happen in Ontario Place. The goal is to be able to preserve its heritage, landscape and architecture heritage, and to be able to develop and adding programs in areas that's not going to compromise its spirit. And this is what the proper way that this call for development should have happened.
David, let me circle back to something you said a few moments ago, which is the former chief of police for the City of Toronto, Mark Saunders, has a role in all of this. What is his role?
He's the advisor to the premier and cabinet on what should happen. Why he was chosen, we were just told, he's an experienced public servant and a smart guy. I know that part of his role is going to be reaching out to Toronto councillors and sort of sounding them out. Everything we're hearing is that a proponent, if not completely chosen, that the province essentially has a plan that they want to move forward with. And I think now he will be a valuable role. Toronto, most of the councillors know him. He came and appeared before council many times to answer questions on policing issues. So I think part of his role will be consultation, but also I think trying to sort of soften the ground and hoping that they'll, if not exactly embrace the way the province has gone about it, at least give them a fair hearing, or not sort of fight them right out of the gate. I feel like I should mention, just because as well as going to Ontario Place as a kid, I worked there 3.5 summers. So when you talk about the Forum, I worked at the front gate, but I also worked at the Forum many nights. So it is an interesting, fascinating place.
Huh. Okay, let me just pick up on the Saunders issue here, and that is, you're quite right. He's an experienced public servant. He knows the members of City Council from his time as chief. To the best of your knowledge, does he have any apparent knowledge in tourism or property redevelopment or architecture or anything like that?
No, he's a lifelong police officer. That's been his life. He was started as a young officer in Toronto and finished his career at the top of the police heap. But there's been nothing to suggest that he has any expertise in the issues that are on the table right now. As I said, we know he has I think he has a good working relationship with the deputy city manager who's on the Toronto side, is leading consultations. That's all we know.
Aziza, are you comfortable with the role he's played throughout this?
Not so much, because we should not forget that we're dealing with a modern heritage site here that has been acknowledged on the international arena, and yet not having somebody who has experience in heritage preservation is very worrisome.
Okay, David, let's pick up then on the issue of the bids. I gather there have been, at least your newspaper has reported, there have been sort of 3 competing bids trying to get the Premier and the government's eye on this. Do you have any inside dope on who's got the edge at the moment and what the project would look like?
I would say I have informed speculation, and that is that it still appears, as we reported a while ago, myself and my colleague Robert Benzi, it still appears that a Austrian spa developer company called, I believe it's pronounced Terme, Therme, appears to have the inside edge. The other main competing bids were one from Ken Tannenbaum, part of the MLSE family, and his Kilmer group, which was more of a sort of a campus sort of appeal with a bunch of different things. There was going to be an event center, indoor and outdoor, sort of a swimming or splash area, park space. I'm not hearing that is got a lot of traction. And then the other main one was sort of a bit of an unknown bid. They haven't really talked publicly. We haven't heard much about it, by Carl DeMarco, who used to be with WWF or now WWE Canada, so a wrestling promoter. So my hunch is, from what I'm hearing, and I think we're going to hear some news pretty soon, I think it appears like some kind of development with Terme, which is kind of like, from everything I've read, I'm waiting for the Star to send me on a tour of their European spa resorts. But if everything I've read, it's
I'll bet you
basically
are.
Like,
I'll bet you are.
Yeah, it's essentially kind of like Great Wolf Lodge water park, but with adult kind of spa areas and adult pools, and sort of a mix where and it has palm trees and beaches, but it's all enclosed in glass. So kind of think of I guess the idea that in February you could have essentially a little mini, tropical vacation here. But what I'm hearing is they're not just going to hand them the whole site. It's huge, right? It's 155 acres. They know that there would be some controversy over that. I think it would be just a part of it. West Island is probably the most likely part, and that there would be other components. Live Nation has to be part of it because they have the long-term lease on Budweiser stage. I think it makes sense that probably Live Nation will have some kind of expanded role if there is some kind of a expanded event space, or they build on what they already do. And then I think there will probably be smaller other components that will be less commercial to, maybe blunt some of the criticism. So I wouldn't be shocked if you see some kind of like a, climate change research center, or some kind of maybe educational kind of component. The other wild card is that part of the Ken Tannenbaum bid was bringing the Ontario Science Centre from its current location down to the waterfront. I think that's also a possibility. There are a lot of people who think that makes sense. They think it makes sense to have the Science Centre in a more sort of central populated area. It would also free up land farther up the Don Valley for affordable housing, or housing of some kind, which obviously there's a great thirst for. The Science Centre it's a provincial building, but it sits on city land. So you could see some kind of cooperation to get housing going there. So that I don't know that, but that's certainly a possibility.
Okay, a bunch of things to follow up with Aziza therefore. First of all, on the Science Centre, like Ontario Place, that was a Robarts government initiative, and it was actually a centennial year project. And of course, it's 50 plus years been in Don Mills. Aziza, if they wanted to move the Science Centre down to Ontario Place, how would you regard that?
Well, I would regard it as a double insult because, kind of the building that's designed by Murayama and Teshima is also, like a modern icon of Toronto. It's recognized internationally. So to empty it and demolish it and to bring that program to an entire place that you're going to desecrate, you are losing two icons of Canadian modern heritage. And I'm so surprised that with Canada's young history and that it would actually get rid of its modern heritage, like so quickly and simply for profit. And it's not thinking of all of the public amenities that it's providing. So, yeah, I mean, I think it would be like a very poor choice.
Okay, and let me follow up on this other thing. And I preface this question by saying I don't mean it to sound parochial because, of course, we want Canadians to be able to bid on projects in other countries. So we can't be offended if Austrians want to bid on projects in our countries. But if there are two strong Canadian, Ontario-based plans and they go for an Austrian plan, is that problematic for you? Aziza, that's for you.
You mean for me?
Yeah.
No, not at all. I think that we live in a very global world. I think what's troublesome to me is the quality of the proposal, that the proposal did not integrate a conservation management plan that's going to acknowledge the heritage, that the proposal of the Austrian is going to include, a type of program that's not compatible with the norms of sustainability. If you're going to build a gigantic enclosed pool that's going to have an exotic climate and palm trees, that's going to consume a huge amount of energies. So in a sense, Toronto should be having the highest, as a world-class city, the highest standards in public spaces, in accessibility to the waterfront open to all, norms of sustainability. And yet what we see today is completely the opposite. So we're in a way walking backwards.
All right, Aziz, I'm going to get you to do again what you did a few moments ago, and that is speak to a couple of pictures here. And Sheldon, I'm on number 12 right now. If you could bring up, there we go. Why don't you describe what we're seeing here? For starters, let's do that.
Those are skateboarders that are using the parking of entire place when it's not in use. So the site is actually very lively at any time of the day and of the week and of the season. So it's not empty like Doug Ford mentions. This is one of the pods, which is this futuristic structure that's holding through like a central mast, and it used to hold an exhibition spaces and restaurants. Then it had even like a nightclub and wedding hall. And today, unfortunately, it is empty, and the views from the pods are fantastic towards the city.
Okay, so if they keep Cinesphere and they keep the pods and they keep all of these other things that we've shown pictures of that you find to be of particular heritage significance, and they maybe add some other new things, is that a sort of a march in the right direction for you?
Well, but it all depends how it's done. I mean, there is, kind of an international standards method, to protect any type of heritage is in a way to have a plan. And in that plan, you highlight what are the elements that have the highest significance. As I mentioned before, entire place is extremely special, is that it really intermingles a landscape, an artificial landscape with different bridges and infrastructures and buildings. If you only preserve one aspect of it, you have lost its spirit. So I think, proper study, this is what, our group, the Future of Entire Place and Entire Place for All, have been, we're, non-profit citizen initiatives. What we're trying to ask the provincial government to do is to actually follow the proper manner to deal with modern heritage or any type of heritage.
Okay, we're down to about a last minute and a half here. And David, let me give it to you. When do you expect to get a verdict out of the government of Ontario on what's going to happen?
Very soon. The mayor was quoted as saying he expects something very shortly. And I've been making calls in the last couple of days, and the drumbeat is very loud that we're going to hear something from the province. I think it will probably be sort of the beginning of a process rather than the end. Because they're going to say that they want public consultation, but they're going to announce, I think, whatever the main commercial kind of winning bidder or vision, and then a bunch of other uses for it. So, and we're already behind because the tourism minister said in late winter that it would be announced by spring. So I'm going to say I wouldn't be shocked if it's in the next week or two.
All right, next week or two. And then by the time consultations are done, when might you expect to see the very first shovel in the ground?
Well, that's really hard because we don't know what the consultations are going to be, how meaningful they're going to be, what impact they're going to be. I mean, I think one of the people involved in one of the bids I talked to yesterday said, years, whether it's 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. The one thing I think that the provincial government, if I was in the provincial government, what I would be wary of is you can't say we're not going to consult people, but there was a little project farther down the lake called Sidewalk Labs that had a lot of consultation and ended up not going ahead. So I think they're going to have to figure out how to not lead themselves open to not having real consultation, but at the same time have an end date where they can say, okay, we're gonna do this thing.
Gotcha. This was really helpful, you two. Aziza and David, thank you so much for joining us on TVO tonight. It was great to have you both. Take care, everybody. And once they unveil the plan, it'd be great to have you come back and tell us what you think about what they've unveiled.
Sure.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay. Take good care, everybody.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.